The morning I found the phone, I wasn't even looking for anything. I was just tidying up the kitchen counter the way I do every morning, moving things aside, wiping underneath, putting the mail in a neat stack. My niece had left her cell phone face up next to the coffee maker. The screen was still lit. I wasn't trying to read it. I really wasn't. But the message was right there, and my eyes are still sharp enough to catch words from 3 feet away. She signed the first 2 already. We just need the third one, and we're set. I stood there with my dish towel in my hand and read it again. Then I set the towel down very carefully, walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and let the feeling move through me. That cold, sinking feeling that comes when something you didn't want to be true turns out to be exactly true. I should back up. My name is Lorraine. I'm 67 years old. I live in the same house in Raleigh, North Carolina that my husband Gerald and I bought together in 1989. Gerald passed 4 years ago, a heart attack, quick and without warning, the way he always said he'd want to go if he had a choice. We were married 31 years. I still reach for him sometimes in the morning before I'm fully awake. After Gerald died, I rattled around this house alone for about 8 months. My daughter Simone lives in Portland with her husband and their 2 kids, so she visits when she can, but it's not often. My son Anthony is in Atlanta. We talk every Sunday. Neither of them could uproot their lives to come be with me, and I never asked them to. I am not a woman who asks for things like that. My niece Brianna is the one who offered. She's my younger sister Cora's daughter, 34 years old, sharp, pretty, always had a good head on her shoulders, or so I thought. She called me one evening about 14 months ago and said she and her boyfriend Kevin had been talking, and they thought it might be a good idea if they came to stay with me for a while. Help around the house, she said. Keep me company. She'd been between jobs since the marketing firm she worked at downsized, and Kevin did freelance IT work, so neither of them was tied to a specific place. Auntie Lorraine, she said, I just don't love the idea of you being alone in that big house. I told her I was fine. She said she knew that, but that it would give her peace of mind. She made it sound like she was the one who needed reassurance. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She's family. She's Cora's child, and Cora and I grew up sharing a bedroom for 16 years. You don't say no to that. They moved in on a Saturday in October. Brianna brought casserole dishes and throw blankets and hung a little wooden sign in the guest bathroom that said, "Home is wherever we're together." Kevin was quieter, polite, always called me ma'am, carried every box without being asked. I liked him well enough at first. He had a stillness to him that I mistook for steadiness. The first few months were genuinely nice. Brianna cooked on the nights my knees were bad. Kevin fixed the gutter that had been sagging since the summer. We ate dinner together most evenings, watched television, and I won't pretend I didn't appreciate having voices in the house again. Then, somewhere around February, the supplements started. Brianna brought home a bag from a health and wellness store one afternoon and set it on the counter with some ceremony. She'd read an article, she said, about inflammation in older adults and how certain supplements can make a real difference. Joint health, sleep quality, mental clarity. She bought a whole regimen. Fish oil, magnesium, something called lion's mane mushroom extract. I want you to try these, Auntie, she said. I've been worried about you forgetting things. I hadn't been forgetting things. I'd forgotten where I put my reading glasses once. That's it. But she looked so earnest standing there with her little bag of bottles, and I thought, this is what it looks like when someone loves you. This is what Cora's daughter does when she's worried about her aunt. So I let her. Every evening after dinner, Brianna would bring me a small glass of water and a little pile of supplements. 2 capsules, 1 soft gel, and 1 white tablet she said was for circulation. She'd sit with me while I took them. Sometimes she'd pour herself a glass of wine and we'd talk for a while after. It felt like being cared for. That is a part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, how much it felt like being cared for. The forgetting started slowly enough that I almost didn't notice. A Thursday felt like a Wednesday. I'd start a sentence and lose the back end of it. I wrote myself a grocery list and then stood in the cereal aisle at Harris Teeter for what felt like a long time, looking at the list, not quite able to connect the words to any action. I told myself it was grief. It was the house. It was getting older. It was all the things you tell yourself when you don't want to look directly at something. But then one morning in March, I woke up and I genuinely could not remember if I'd paid my property tax. I'm a woman who has paid every bill on time for 40 years. The idea that I might have missed something that important frightened me, and I said as much to Brianna at breakfast. She reached over and patted my hand and said, "Auntie Lorraine, that's exactly why I've been trying to get you to see a doctor. Maybe it's time to talk about whether this house is still the right situation for you." Something about the way she said it. Not wrong, exactly, just prepared. Like she'd been waiting for that particular door to open. "What do you mean?" I said. "Nothing bad. I just think maybe somewhere smaller would be less stressful, less to manage. Kevin and I have been looking into some really lovely senior communities over in Cary. We could take a tour." I said I'd think about it. She nodded like that was the right answer and refilled my coffee. I did not take my supplements that night. I'd been getting up to use the restroom at 2 or 3 in the morning, another new development. And that particular night I walked past the guest room, and the door was open a crack, and I heard them talking. I want to be honest, I didn't stop to eavesdrop deliberately. I slowed down because I heard my name, and then I stood very still in the dark hallway because something in Kevin's voice made the hair on my arms stand up. She said she'd think about it. That's progress. Brianna's voice, "We need to get the financial POA finalized before we bring up the house. If she sells first and puts it in a trust, we lose the whole window." Kevin said something I couldn't catch. Then Brianna again, "She's already slowing down enough that she won't question it. The supplements are working." I walked back to my room. I sat on my bed. I did not turn on the light. "The supplements are working." I turned those 3 words over in my mind for the rest of the night. Somewhere around 5 in the morning, when the sky started going gray at the edges of the curtains, I made a decision. I wasn't going to panic. I wasn't going to confront them yet. What I was going to do was be very, very careful. And I was going to find out exactly what they had been giving me. I want to explain something about the days that followed, because I think people might wonder why I didn't just call my children immediately, or call the police, or throw them out that same night. When someone you love does something like this to you, there's a war that breaks out inside you. One part of you knows exactly what's happening. Another part keeps insisting there must be an explanation, a misunderstanding, a conversation taken out of context, some version of this that doesn't mean what it plainly means. You've known this person their whole life. You held them when they were small. You went to their college graduation. You cannot reconcile the person you thought you knew with the thing you just heard. That war takes time to settle. And I also knew from watching Gerald navigate enough difficult situations in his career that acting in panic gives the other person the advantage. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I moved. So I started palming the supplements. Each evening when Brianna brought them, I'd put them in my mouth, take the sip of water, and then, the moment she looked away, reached for her wine glass, glanced at the television, I'd press them against the inside of my cheek. I'd excuse myself to the bathroom a few minutes later. I got good at it quickly. I put the capsules in a small Ziploc bag I hid at the back of my sock drawer. Within 10 days, I had a week's worth. I also had my mind back. Slowly, like a room clearing a fog, the edges of things got sharp again. I started writing things down in a notebook I kept in my purse. Dates, conversations, things I noticed. My primary care doctor is a woman named Dr. Chen. I've been seeing her for 11 years. I called her office on a Tuesday and made an appointment for a routine visit. I did not tell Brianna. I drove myself. When I got there, I sat in the exam room and handed Dr. Chen the Ziploc bag and told her everything. She didn't say much at first. She examined the capsules closely. She said she wanted to send them to a lab and she wanted to run blood work on me that day. "Lorraine," she said, "I'm going to ask you a straightforward question, and I want you to answer it as honestly as you can. How long have you been experiencing the cognitive symptoms you described to me just now?" "About 6 weeks," I said. "Maybe 8. She nodded slowly. "And they've improved since you stopped taking these?" "Yes," I said. "Significantly." She scheduled a follow-up for 2 weeks out and made me promise to call her if anything changed. Before I left, she also quietly handed me the number for Adult Protective Services and the number for a patient advocate at the hospital. She said she wasn't telling me what to do. She just wanted me to have them. I put both numbers in my phone on the drive home. The lab results came back in 11 days. One of the capsules, the white tablet that Brianna had told me was for circulation, contained a significant dose of a sedative, not a lethal amount, but enough, taken nightly over weeks, to produce exactly what I'd been experiencing: cognitive slowing, memory disruption, confusion, fatigue. Dr. Chen reported her findings. That same week, I called a family attorney named Mr. Patterson, a man Gerald had used for our estate planning years ago. I drove to his office on a Thursday morning and spent 2 hours with him going through everything, any papers I may have signed in the past 14 months. The status of my deed, my accounts, my existing will. Mr. Patterson found that I had in fact signed 2 documents during a just some paperwork moment with Kevin back in December. One was a limited power of attorney, limited, fortunately, which meant its scope was narrow, but it existed. The other was an authorization form for a financial account I barely used. We began the process of revoking both. He also advised me very calmly that I was within my rights to require them to leave my home, and he helped me understand exactly how to do it. I chose a Sunday. My children both knew by then. I had called Simone first, late on a Friday night, and she cried in a way I haven't heard her cry since she was small. She wanted to fly out immediately. I asked her to wait, told her I needed to handle this myself, that I was capable of handling it, and that I would call her the moment it was done. Anthony said, "Mom, I'll drive up tonight." I told him the same thing. I needed them to know I was not a woman who needed to be rescued. I needed to do this myself. That Sunday morning I made coffee for all 3 of us the way I always did. I set Brianna's mug on the kitchen table. She still likes 2 sugars, I remembered it out of habit. And I waited for them to come downstairs. When they sat down, I put a folder on the table between us. Inside was a letter from Mr. Patterson, the lab report from Dr. Chen's office, and a printed copy of a 30-day notice to vacate prepared according to North Carolina law. I didn't raise my voice. I am my mother's daughter, and my mother used to say that you don't need volume when you have facts. I said I need you both to read what's in that folder. Kevin looked at Brianna. Brianna looked at me. She started to say something. I think she was going to say that I was misunderstanding, that there was an explanation. But I put my hand up very gently and said, "Please read it first." The kitchen was very quiet for a while. Brianna cried. I want to say that part clearly because I don't want to make myself sound like I felt nothing, because I didn't feel nothing. I watched my sister's daughter cry at my kitchen table, and something in me wanted to reach over and put my hand on hers the way I always had. I didn't. She said she was sorry. Kevin said nothing at all. He stared at the table. I told her that I was not going to argue, I was not going to listen to explanations that morning, and that they had 30 days. The legal matter was in Mr. Patterson's hands. If she wanted to speak to me again, really speak to me, with honesty in the future, that was something I'd consider when I was ready. I stood up and took my coffee to the back porch. It was a cool morning, still early enough that the birds were loud in the oak tree at the back of the yard. I sat in the rocking chair Gerald used to use on weekend mornings, and I drank my coffee, and I looked at the garden he planted in 2003, and I let myself feel everything. Not just the anger, not just the grief, all of it. The grief for what I thought my relationship with Brianna was, and the grief that a person can get old enough for the people around her to think she's easy to fool, and the strange, quiet satisfaction of knowing that I hadn't been. They were out in 3 weeks. Brianna took the throw blankets and the casserole dishes. She left the little wooden sign. I threw it away. After they left, I called my sister Cora. That was the hardest phone call I've ever made. Cora didn't believe me at first. Then she was silent for a very long time. Then she said, "Lorraine, I don't know what to say to you." And she started crying too. I told her this wasn't about her. I told her I didn't want Brianna's behavior to sit between us for the rest of our lives, because we are too old and too close to let that happen. Cora said she would call Brianna herself. I don't know what that conversation was. I didn't ask. Simone came the following weekend. She flew in on a Friday night, and we sat on the back porch until almost midnight, and she held my hand, and I told her everything from the beginning, and she listened to all of it without interrupting. which is one of the things I love most about my daughter. She said, "Mom, how are you really doing?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm better than I expected to be." And that was true. There are things I know now that I didn't know a year ago. I know that I should have a clear, updated will and that copies should be held by both my children and my attorney. I have that now. I know that any document someone asks me to sign, any document at all, gets read first by Mr. Patterson, no exceptions. I know that my property deed is in order and protected, and I know what a financial power of attorney actually means, and what rights I'm giving away when I sign one. I also know something harder to put into legal language. I know that kindness can be a strategy. I know that the person who brings you something warm and says, "I just want to take care of you," deserves the same careful attention as the person who seems obviously threatening. I know that confusion and fogginess are not things to simply accept as the inevitable costs of getting older. Sometimes they're symptoms, and symptoms have causes, and you are allowed to ask what the cause is. I know that I am 67 years old and I am not done. Gerald used to say I was the most stubborn woman he'd ever met. He meant it as a compliment. I didn't always take it as one. I take it as one now. I kept the rocking chair on the back porch right where it's always been. I still sit in it on weekend mornings with my coffee. The oak tree is the same. The garden still blooms every spring the way Gerald planned it. The house is mine. It has always been mine. I plan to stay in it for a very long time. People ask me sometimes what the hardest part was. They expect me to say it was finding out, or the confrontation, or watching Brianna carry her things out of the house I've lived in for 35 years. But it wasn't any of those things. The hardest part was the week before I did anything at all, when I already knew, and I was still pouring their coffee in the morning and saying goodnight at the end of the day, and pretending that nothing had shifted. That took more out of me than anything else. What I've come to understand is this. The choices we make when we're frightened say more about us than the choices we make when everything is easy. It would have been easy to fall apart. It would have been understandable. What Brianna and Kevin were doing had a name, elder financial abuse, and it happens to people every single day in this country, often by the hands of people they love and trust completely. I had every reason to feel helpless. I chose not to. That choice didn't come from nowhere. It came from paying attention my whole life. It came from watching Gerald handle hard things with patience and information instead of panic. It came from my mother, who raised me to believe that a woman who knows her own mind is not easily moved. Those things don't disappear just because you get older. They accumulate, and when you need them, they're there. Brianna made a calculation about me. She looked at a 67-year-old widow living alone in a big house, and decided she was looking at someone whose best thinking was behind her. That calculation was wrong, and I think about why she got it so wrong. It wasn't just greed, though the greed was real. It was a failure of respect, the kind that creeps in when someone decides that age equals diminishment. When someone stops seeing you clearly and starts seeing only what they want to take. The consequence of that kind of thinking is always the same. You underestimate the person in front of you. You get sloppy. You leave your phone screen up on the kitchen counter. I don't hold on to anger about what happened. Not because I forced myself to let it go, but because anger at Brianna would mean letting what she did take up more space in my life than it deserves. She made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's as complicated as it needs to be. What I do hold on to is the lesson about my own vigilance. I was too quick to accept the framing that being cared for was something I needed to submit to. The moment someone positions themselves as your caretaker without you asking, the right question is, why? Not because all kindness is suspicious, but because your own well-being is your responsibility first, and handing that responsibility to someone else, even gradually, even warmly, is something to do with your eyes open. I'm still in the rocking chair on the back porch most mornings. The oak tree is still there. Gerald's garden came back again this spring, same as always. The black-eyed Susans he planted along the fence, the rosemary bush by the back steps that has survived every winter for 20 years. The rain is still here too, all of her,